Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the r/lounge. Well, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family, and sometimes you really wish you could. Today in the r/lounge, Opie is out here just trying to build a name for himself, not his family. Mom threatened to disown me if I didn't make my brother a partner in my business. I stopped paying her mortgage and car loan. Have you ever heard what they say, don't mix business and family? Well, I don't know who they are, but they must have been burned a few times too many, just like me, because they're dang right. I, 43M, built a business for myself from the ground up. It wasn't easy because I came from a tough background. My mom, 58F, had me when she was just a teenager, and my dad split when he heard I was on the way. Her parents were ashamed to have a pregnant teenage daughter and turned her out, so she had to fend for herself. For the first 17 years of my life, we were dirt poor. No, we weren't just poor, we were in poverty. Everything changed when I started working. It wasn't immediate. At first, I took any job I could just to get food on our bellies or keep a roof over our heads. Back then, I could work as many as 3 or 4 jobs at a time. I still had the endless energy of youth, and the fear of going hungry was a great motivator. It was at one of these jobs that I met Arnold, a man who inspired me with his business acumen. I looked up to him because he had come from the dirt like me, and now he was more successful than I could ever imagine. He took a liking to me because I was a clever kid with a lot of ambition, so he became my mentor. He watched my progress closely, gave me advice, and opportunities to observe how he did business. When I was about 20 years old, I felt I'd learned enough and presented him with a business idea that I had. Arnold believed in me and my idea, and he invested in my business. With his advice and backing, I slowly grew that one business into the chain of businesses I own today. Arnold isn't around anymore, but I thank him every day for the way he changed my life. That brings us to my brother, Nick 40M. He's my half-brother with yet another unknown father, but I always just call him my brother. Nick is not the ambitious type. He seemed to accept our lot in life and spent his teenage and young adult years getting into trouble with his peers. When I was starting to work with Arnold, I tried to introduce them. I hoped he would be able to learn from him and make positive changes in his life like I had. Nick didn't take it seriously, which disappointed me. He said Arnold was full of himself, and Arnold hadn't been too impressed with Nick either. That didn't stop me from trying to get my brother to take his future more seriously. I tried to get him involved in my business while it was still growing. Arnold had disapproved and threatened to pull his investment, but I insisted. He was my brother, and I wanted both of us to rise out of our poor background together. Arnold understood and relented, though he still thought it was a bad idea. Nick put in the work for exactly 1 day, and then disappeared when he found out he wouldn't be earning a paycheck. I told him that he would earn from our profits, but he said he preferred the certainty of a paycheck and went back to his job at a local factory. No amount of pleading would persuade him. Why am I digging up all these stories from almost 30 years ago? Because it's all background for what happened a few days ago. My mom asked me to come over and told me that Nick wasn't doing well. He was struggling financially and had to move in with her recently. I wasn't surprised. Nick was usually going through tough times, and he'd always bounce back to Mom during those times. I was expecting her to ask me for some money to help, as usual, but what she said next shocked me. She told me about Nick's difficulty holding down a stable job, which I already knew all too well. Then, she asked me to make him a partner in my business. I didn't believe I heard her right at first. She said that the jobs I'd given him in the past were too low for him, and that's why he'd never stuck around. According to her, it was embarrassing for the founder's brother to work as a lowly manager. God knows I've tried countless times to help Nick. I've offered him jobs at my companies, and even offered to train him for a managerial position with the promise that he could move higher as he gained experience. Each time, he would show up for a couple of days and disappear without a word. Eventually, I simply stopped trying. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. I explained that I couldn't just give Nick a high position like that. He lacked work ethic and wasn't qualified. I was prepared to start him off low and promote him as he gained experience and proved himself. But making him a partner was out of the question. I'd spent more than 20 years building this company up from nothing. There was no way I was just going to hand over part ownership to him. "But he's your brother," my mom said, as if that meant he was entitled to decades of my hard work. I agreed that he was my brother, and I cared about him too, which is why I tried to get him involved in the business when I was just starting. It's why I'd given him so many chances, which he'd thrown away each time. I was done giving him chances. I asked how much he needed from me, and my mom snapped, "We don't want your handouts." She then said that ever since I became successful, I'd been using my money as a tool to control both of them. She said I just gave them enough money to get by so that they'd be forced to come crawling back to me when they needed more. She accused me of not wanting my brother to be a partner, to keep him from being financially independent. I couldn't believe my ears. Did she think I liked having to provide for both of them? Nick was a grown man who couldn't hold down a job and drank and gambled away whatever money he had. My mom was an older woman who honestly wasn't much older than me, but I still made sure she was comfortable. I paid the mortgage for the home where she lived, where Nick lived more often than not. I also handled her car note and sent her some money monthly for essentials and utilities. That usually came out to thousands of dollars a month just to keep her happy. I wasn't trying to control anyone. I was trying to help them. I told her that I had been more than generous. I'd given Nick more than enough chances, and he threw them in my face each time. I pointed out that I wasn't running a hot dog stand. I ran a business that has locations across the country. Making Nick a partner wouldn't help him or my company. With his lack of knowledge and experience, he would run my business into the ground, ruining things for me and several employees who relied on me. It would be the worst business decision I could ever make. My mom gave me a glare I hadn't seen since I was a child. She said family was what mattered most, but I cared more about employees who had nothing to do with me. You were in the midst of a heated conversation with your mother, who accused you of twisting her words. Despite your attempts to clarify your position, she dismissed your feelings and insisted that your success should be shared with the family. This sentiment struck you as entitled, and you felt it undermined the hard work you had put into building your business. You tried to explain that while your family had been important to you, you were the one who had struggled to establish your business. You emphasized that your success was your own and that the decisions regarding it were ultimately yours to make. During the conversation, you also addressed your concerns about your brother, Nick, suggesting that your mother needed to stop enabling him so he could learn to be independent. Unfortunately, your mother wasn't receptive to your arguments. Instead, she raised her voice, accusing you of not wanting to see your family succeed. She presented you with an ultimatum. Either make your brother a partner in your business or face disownment. The absurdity of her demand almost made you laugh, as you couldn't fathom that she was serious. You asked her if she truly would disown you for refusing to hand over a part of your business to someone who hadn't earned it. Her response was an unequivocal yes, claiming that if you didn't commit to what she called your collective success, you didn't deserve to be part of the family. This only fueled your frustration. You felt that her actions were less about Nick's success and more about her entitlement to the fruits of your labor. You told her that her approach would not work, and if she truly believed disowning you was the right move, you wouldn't fight her on it. She shouted that she never wanted to see you again, and you stormed out of her house, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. In the days following that confrontation, you found it difficult to shake off the argument. You replayed the conversation in your mind, struggling to comprehend the level of entitlement and ingratitude that seemed to pervade her words. You questioned whether you had done enough for Nick, reflecting on how hard you had worked to improve the family situation. Instead of receiving pride and support, you felt they were trying to exploit your success. To clear your mind, you decided to write down your thoughts. You hoped that articulating your feelings would help you gain some clarity, yet you still felt as confused and hurt as before. You reminded yourself that it wasn't reasonable for anyone to demand a partnership in a business solely based on familial ties. If Nick preferred chasing his dreams instead of working for a paycheck, that was his choice. Ultimately, You knew you had to prioritize your own well-being and the integrity of your business, even if it meant setting firm boundaries against the family pressure. Over the next week, you focused on not making any rash decisions while dealing with the fallout from the argument. You adhered to a principle you held in both your personal and professional life. Avoid making significant decisions when emotions are high. However, as the days passed, you realized that detaching yourself emotionally from the situation with your family was not entirely possible. Family dynamics are inherently complex, and emotions inevitably come into play. Recognizing this challenge, you decided to seek advice from a trusted friend, a fellow business owner who had navigated similar familial issues in the past. You hoped he could provide you with an unbiased perspective. During an evening meetup over drinks, you shared your family background, Nick's struggles, and the details of the conversation with your mom, including her ultimatum. He echoed the sentiments you had seen in comments from your earlier reflections. Your mother was crossing boundaries, and Nick was relying on you as a safety net. He advised you that while it would be painful, you needed to establish boundaries. If that meant resisting your mother's ultimatum, then you should do so without guilt. It was tough to hear. You loved your family, but also recognized that you didn't want to be exploited. If your mother was willing to sever ties over your refusal to meet her unreasonable demands, then perhaps it was best for both of you. A few days later, your mother called to check if you had made a decision. You replied that she had already made her choice, and you were choosing to respect it. She reacted angrily, hurling insults at you, claiming you were ungrateful and worthless. After hanging up, you decided to block her number, signifying a more significant break. Before fully cutting ties, you wanted to show your family the real implications of their choice to disown you. You called your bank to halt the automatic payments for your mother's mortgage and car note, opting not to inform her in advance. You anticipated that she would soon realize what was happening when the late notices began arriving in the mail. It took about a month for her to discover the situation. By then, you had already blocked her number, so she couldn't reach you directly. When you returned home one day, you found her waiting for you, clearly distressed and ready to confront the reality of the situation you had set in motion. Standing on my front doorstep, I braced myself for the usual barrage of shouting and insults I had come to expect. However, this time, nothing came. Instead, she simply greeted me with a casual hi, as if the last fight we had never happened. The sudden shift caught me off guard, and she proceeded to ask how I had been. I crossed my arms defensively, not quite ready to engage in small talk. "What are you doing here?" I replied, my tone firm. She frowned, seemingly puzzled by my question. I explained that I wasn't expecting to see her anywhere near my house, especially since she had made it clear that she no longer wanted anything to do with me. To my surprise, she laughed and placed her hand on my shoulder. "That didn't mean anything, you know," she said, brushing off my concerns. "People say things they don't mean when they're emotional." I countered, "I didn't know that. I was raised to say what I mean at all times, even when I'm angry." My words seemed to irritate her. She didn't appreciate me using her own words against her. "Stop being petty," she said, her voice rising. "You need to be mature." I could sense another fight brewing, and I was exhausted from the weight of the day. I decided to walk past her and unlock my door. As I stepped inside, she attempted to follow me, but I swiftly shut the door in her face, locking it behind me. I heard her immediately trying the door, and when she realized it was locked, she began shaking it violently. "Open the door," she shouted. I yelled back, warning her not to break it, but she paid me no mind, continuing to demand that I let her in. I sank down on the hallway floor, listening as my mother began to unravel. It was painful to witness, but a part of me felt relieved at the thought that maybe she was beginning to understand that I wasn't just a meal ticket to be treated however she liked. I believed she realized that I wouldn't respond to threats or shouting because, eventually, her voice quieted, and she finally admitted what was really on her mind. "What's going to happen to my mortgage and car?" she asked, her tone shifting to one of concern. For a moment, I considered ignoring her question, pretending I had retreated further into the house, but I decided against it. She was already here, so there was no point in postponing this conversation for another day. I told her that her son, meaning me, was no longer going to be responsible for those bills, and that she now had another son who could pick up where I had left off. She fell silent for so long that I thought she might have left. However, when I peeked through the peephole, I saw she was still standing there, processing what I had said. Eventually, she broke the silence, saying, "Nick isn't capable of paying for either of them." "That's not my problem," I replied flatly. At that moment, a headache began to throb at my temples, so I decided to retreat to my room, hoping she would be gone when I returned. Thankfully, when I came back later, the space was quiet, and I found some peace for a few days. I thought maybe my mom had finally understood my message and would leave me alone, but that hope was short-lived. A few days later, she showed up again, this time with my brother, Nick. They caught up with me in the parking lot of my office building. Nick looked much the same as the last time I had seen him, poorly groomed and in desperate need of a good meal. Life had clearly not treated him well. For a brief moment, I felt pity for him, remembering how many times I had tried to help him get back on track with jobs and cash. Each time, he had squandered the opportunities one had given him. How do you help someone like that? Even if I handed him $1 million today, I knew it would be gone within 2 months. Just as I was lost in thought, Nick stepped forward aggressively, getting in my face and accusing me of abandoning our mother. It was still early afternoon, but I could already smell the alcohol on his breath. "She disowned me," I retorted, trying to push past him. "Get out of my way." He grabbed my shirt, trying to shake me, but he didn't have much luck. Although we were about the same height, I took good care of myself. I hit the gym at least 3 times a week and played squash on the weekends. Nick, on the other hand, was thin and clearly already a few drinks deep. When he threw a sucker punch, it caught me off guard, and I stumbled back slightly, surprised. He laughed at my reaction, but I quickly regained my composure and hit him back, sending him crashing to the ground. My mother screamed and jumped between us, trying to stop the fight. The situation escalated quickly. I noticed her holding her arms out, instinctively trying to protect Nick, who seemed to be in more danger if a fight broke out. Perhaps she had chosen his side, which added to the tension. After a brief skirmish, I wiped the blood from my lip and straightened my shirt, trying to regain some composure in a moment that felt chaotic and charged. "I never want to see the two of you here again unless you're coming with an apology," I declared, my voice firm. I emphasized that they had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. I refused to be responsible for their poor decisions any longer. My mother, overwhelmed with emotion, began to cry and plead with me, but I stood my ground. I was done. Both my brother and mother were adults, and I had already invested so much time and money into improving my brother's life, paying thousands of dollars each month for my mom to have a comfortable lifestyle. Instead of gratitude, I was met with exclusion, betrayal, and even violence. I felt a wave of resolve wash over me as I told them I was finished. I warned them that if either of them set foot on my property again, whether my home or my business, I would call the police. My mother's tears seemed to weigh heavily in the air, but the mention of police frightened Nick. He began to pull my mother away, clearly anxious about the situation. Weeks passed without any word from my mother. I started receiving notifications about canceled payments, along with threats of foreclosure on the house. I anticipated similar notices regarding the repossession of my car. One day, Nick showed up at my house, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Though I considered calling the police, I decided to hear him out. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him, sober and seemingly making an effort to take care of himself, though he still appeared tired and unhappy. He didn't beg for forgiveness, but instead expressed his fear about my mother potentially becoming homeless once the house was foreclosed. I reminded him that I wouldn't backtrack on my decision. To my surprise, he acknowledged my stance and simply asked for help in finding her a place to live once she was kicked out. In that moment, I felt a conflict within myself. I told him I would cover 6 months of rent for a small apartment for her, but after that, they would be on their own. Part of me felt weak for offering any help at all, but I reassured myself that this would be the last bit of support I would provide, and it would be strictly on my terms. I held on to the hope that, one day, I might reconnect with my family if they could stand on their own and learn to respect boundaries. Despite the emotional strain, I knew there would always be a soft spot for family in my heart. For now, I chose to concentrate on my business and my own well-being, reminding myself that I had done my best for them and that they had thrown it back in my face. It was painful to witness someone I loved react so negatively, but I understood the importance of not feeling responsible for their reactions or choices. By blocking their numbers and stopping the automatic payments, I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate disrespect anymore. Offering some financial support for a limited time showed that I was still willing to help, but it would be on my own terms. This was a necessary step towards establishing healthy boundaries, and I resolved to focus on my business and personal life, confident that I was on the right path.